From safari adventures and travel updates to conservation and humanitarian stories, this is Africa Revealed, bringing you the heart and soul of East Africa. Now, here's your host, Dr. Matt Jensen.
Hey everybody, welcome back once again to another episode of Africa Revealed. I'm Dr. Matt Jensen, your host, and it's great to have you along. I hope that you enjoy this journey we're taking as you plan and prepare or even dreaming about taking your first trip and your first safari to East Africa. Or you're a seasoned traveler and you just want to get your ears, eyes, and hands on all things when it comes to traveling to Africa. We are the right place for you to stop by. So thanks for showing up. I'm particularly excited about today's episode. And to open up this episode, I'm going to ask you a question. If somebody were to ask you, what is the greatest show on earth? What would be your response? Would it be the Super Bowl? That's probably a big one. And in recent sporting events, how about the World Cup? How about a Taylor Swift concert? Oh, I think all of us would have different definitions of what we consider the greatest show on earth, but I'm not talking about Barnum and Bailey. I'm not talking about the Ringling Brothers. I'm talking about something that's been happening for thousands and thousands of years. So I'm going to answer that question, but first I'm going to share a story. Back in the 1950s, there's somebody you probably have not heard of. His name was Bernard Grzimek. Now, Bernard Grzimek was a German veterinarian and kind of a conservation animal buff. He and his son, Michael, set out to do something that hadn't been done before, and that was to survey the great Serengeti area of East Tanzania by aerial view of airplane. Now, at that point in time, there was no satellite footage. There were no drones. There were no GPSs. There was none of those things that can bring us the beautiful aerial footage that we see in different areas. No, this would be the first time that a specific mission or project was sought to explore the Serengeti, those vast savannas from the air, from above. And what they were not ready for, what they were not prepared for, was not just the beauties of the savannas up above, not from seeing animals from above, but they witnessed something that had not been heavily documented or observed before. And that is the amazing migration bands and patterns of the wildebeest of East Africa. So to answer my question, the greatest show on earth? No, it's not one of those sporting events. It's actually something put on by Mother Nature herself, and it's been going on for years and years. It's the Great Migration of East Africa. Now, some of you might recognize this. They might say, well, it's the Great Wildebeest Migration. But here's the thing. I'm going to break up some myths and tell you some little known facts about the Great Migration, because it's just not the wildebeests that are traveling in that cyclical pattern around East Africa. And so I hope that, especially as we head in to the Great Migration season here in the next month or two, and as you're planning your safari and you're looking forward to the Great Migration, I hope that today's episode is going to bring you some less known information, maybe a few surprises, as you get excited to visit East Africa and experience the amazing spectacle, the Great Migration. By the way, Bernard Grzimek and his son Michael, they documented their travels and their findings, and they did it through book and a movie. It's called The Serengeti Never Dies. I'll put it in the show notes. I highly recommend you find it if you find this interesting. Okay, so let's talk about the Great Migration. What is it exactly? Now, if I were to ask most of you, what is the Great Migration? The majority of people say, well, it's the wildebeest when they cross the rivers and they come across the savannas, and you would be partially right. You see, the Great Migration is much more than just a river crossing or a moving herd of wildebeest. It's much more than that. It's actually one of conservation's and wildlife's greatest phenomenons, because the Great Wildebeest Migration is fueled by survival. That's what it is. It's fueled by survival, because These wildebeests make this cyclical pattern and travels year after year after year. And it doesn't just happen during July, August, and September when most people plan on seeing the Great Migration. It's a year round event. The wildebeest constantly are chasing, and here's interesting fact number one, they are constantly chasing the green grass for food. So they are well aware of the weather patterns, of the clouds, the rain, where it's going to fall, how long it's going to take for the rain to fall and bring the grass up so that they can feed. And they do this in a cyclical pattern. As you know, there's a couple of different rainy seasons in East Africa. There's one in April or May, then there's another one around October, September, even as early as August, but kind of in the late summer, early fall, and then in the late spring. So as the rains fall and as the clouds and the storms circle. Now, I am no meteorologist, so I'm explaining these weather patterns as they affect the great wildebeest migration. So as the rainy season kind of moves and brings green grasses, the wildebeest migrate to find those grasses. So it is a story of survival. And here's the thing, not only are wildebeests traveling in this great migration, but as I alluded to earlier, in fact, let's just say there's about 1.3 to 1.5 million wildebeest that are constantly in a pattern of movement and migration. But there's up to 2.5 million total animals. So who are the other animals? Well, one thing you might not know is that zebras, interesting fact number two, zebras are the odd bedfellows of the wildebeest when they migrate. When you see the great wildebeest herds, you'll be not too surprised now to see that the zebras migrate with them. Why is that? We're going to get into this in a little bit different time in a different episode, but here's the quick reason. The reason being is that the eating patterns of the zebras and the wildebeest are a mutual benefit to both. While one is eating, it can see higher, while the other one's eating, it can see lower, and they oftentimes will eat and congregate together in opposite directions. So they're constantly on the lookout for predators. So not only do we have zebras, but we also have all kinds of antelopes, all kinds of gazelles, Thompson's gazelles, Grant's gazelles, because even wildlife subscribe to the ever so important principle of stronger together or strength in numbers. And so, you know, the joke where if you're ever being chased by a bear, you don't need to outrun the bear, you just need to outrun the guy next to you. Well, same thing with the wildebeest. In great numbers, their chance of survival is much stronger because they just have to stay ahead of the last animals in the herds. Because along with the zebras, along with the antelopes and the gazelles and the huge parade of wildlife that's happening during this great wildebeest migration is, you guessed it, I alluded to it, you also have the predators. They are also constantly looking for food. And as their food, their prey continues to move, of course, they need to do that as well. Now, you know, the other thing is you can see wildebeest, you can see other animals in other parts of East Africa. They're not part of the migrating herds, but the majority of them, as I said, 1.3, 1.4 million are in those migration patterns. And so you do see lots of predator life and predator action in the areas where the great migration is occurring. Now, here's another thing that you might find a little bit surprising. River crossings. And by the way, I would say 90% of the people that reach out to me that want to quote for a safari, they say, I want to see the great migration, which is great. It's a wonderful thing to see. It's a wonderful thing to participate in. But then there's another big majority of that majority that says they want to see the river crossings. But here's the thing. Here's the myth. The majority of the migration takes place when there's river crossings or when there's a river crossing nearby. River crossings are much like any kind of phenomenon. They're not guaranteed to happen. When you're on safari, you may say, I want to see a river crossing. Well, everybody knows that the wildebeest cross over the Mara River. Well, guess what? There are times when the wildebeest will come and they'll stand by the sides of the riverbank, but they're not quite ready to cross. They sense predators that are watching them to slow down when they get into the rivers, or there's a nice tuft of grass. There's not exactly a time to predict when they're going to cross the river. So you need to go on your safari with an open mind. If you're going to see the Great Migration, just have this thought in mind. You are going to witness one of nature's greatest spectacles. Don't limit yourself to one aspect, like a river crossing. So, what else is there to see when there is the Great Migration? Then, on the other end of the migration patterns, in the southern Serengeti area, near Ndutu and the Ngorongoro crater area, is where the Great Migration calving season happens. That's right. Hundreds of thousands of wildebeest babies are born in that area of the migration, and that occurs from January to March. And if I didn't say it, you probably already know it. The river crossings over in the eastern northern Serengeti and the western Masai Mara, those occur over the Masai Mara, the Grumeti Reserve. Those are occurring July to October, which is what most people try to go see. But you can see the calving. You can see the babies being born. You can see the babies learning how to walk over in the Ndutu area of the southern Serengeti, and that occurs January to March. So you can see aspects of the Great Migration throughout the year. In fact, I'm going to put a video up. I was just in the northern Serengeti, a couple of months ago. I think it was May, and we found massive herds of the Great Migration kind of in between their major areas that they migrate to. And you can see in this little video clip, they are in the roads, they are everywhere, and we kind of have to go slow to make sure we don't hurt any of them. But the point is, you can see these massive herds of wildebeest in multiple areas at different times of the year. So I invite you to consider other ways, other times that you can participate and see the Great Migration, because where you might see the river crossings, you're going to miss out on the calving season because it doesn't happen for months and months later. I can still remember the first time I experienced the Great Migration. It was in October several years ago. And again, did you hear me? I said October. It was kind of the end of the season. We were in the Masai Mara, and we had gone over to the area where the herds were coming along. And of course, there was the Mara River. And we expected to see a river crossing. But here's what happened. The herd came to the edge of the river and they stopped and they waited. And they didn't cross. And why didn't they cross? They didn't cross because here's some of the sad news that happens with the Great Migration. Because it is literally the greatest show on earth, hundreds, if not thousands of vehicles descend down onto the Mara River Valley to see the great event. And the problem is, year after year, the vehicles are getting closer and closer and closer to the herds, interrupting their migration direction, increasing their nervousness. Wildebeest are very skittish in the first place. They're very nervous. They're very on edge. Now, when you have hundreds of vehicles that literally box them in and want them to go across the river, they get nervous. And so as we sat and watched, and we anticipated, we waited quite a while, the first couple of brave wildebeest started for the riverbank. And what happens? Vehicles start their engines and a bunch of safari vehicles go even closer to get their tourists the best pictures they can get. What does that do to the wildebeest? It was very sad to watch. The wildebeest got scared and they ran back. This is the type of eroding things that are going on that are going against our conservation efforts in East Africa. When you go to see the Great Migration, I hope that you'll insist that your safari driver stays a safe, responsible distance away, and even encourage other vehicles around you, because the more greedy we get, the more crowded that we get, I know we want those pictures, the more it's going to interrupt this pattern, and it could have a devastating effect over the long-term conservation of these wildebeest. Because remember, they migrate for survival. Important to remember that. So back to my story. We waited, and of course, they started to cross the river one more time. And this time, the vehicles recognized what stopped it, and they didn't move any closer. The wildebeest herds, the first brave ones, got into the river. The rest of them went into the river, and it was magnificent. It's almost like the branching and the forking of veins and arteries. The main, I should say, vein of migration goes, but then as they get into the river and as they go uphill, they look for the easiest path of resistance where it's not so crowded, and you see the different breakoffs, but it's a continuous march and it is spectacular to see. It's amazing. However, again, there are other ways to see the Great Migration. You can also see it in the calving season, as we mentioned. That's January through March. And you can see it in between in certain areas. The Grzimek Reserve is another place where you can see it. But here's the thing. The migration is truly the greatest show on earth. And my invitation to everybody within the sound of my voice and in the sound of any conservation program's voices is that we view it and we appreciate it responsibly. Find a time to go see the Great Migration when it's not part of the high season. You can have an equally wonderful experience, and it can be a much more intimate and private experience when you're there in the lower seasons when there's not nearly as many vehicles there to watch it and to see it with you. The Great Migration is absolutely one of nature's greatest shows. And when you go on a safari to East Africa, I hope you get to witness it, whether it be the calving season or responsibly in the high season with those beautiful river crossings. But I hope that you've learned a little bit that the Great Migration is more than just the greatest show on earth. It's an act of survival. It is an example of the survival of the fittest. And now, thanks to Bernard Grzimek and his son, who shined more light on this whole cyclical pattern of migration, we now have a greater understanding of how these and other animals are dependent on that area and the weather for their survival. Hey, thanks for joining me today. East Africa safaris are one of the greatest experiences ever, and I hope you get the opportunity to experience it for yourself. Thanks again for tuning in. Hey, we're also inviting you to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. We're dropping all kinds of content, not just entertaining and beautiful wildlife photos and videos, but helpful travel tips and advisories to help you plan for and get the most out of your safari. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dr. Matt Jensen, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Africa Revealed. Join us again next week as we uncover more of the wildlife, wonder, and stories that make Africa unforgettable. Until then, adventure awaits.